Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Into Ymedia Foreign Policy Report, we are consistently giving you all the latest updates and analysis right here on Ymedia. What's happening in US and Israel versus Iran war. So is it war that we're looking ahead, or it's going to be diplomacy? Of course, the deadline is nearing Wednesday. That was the ceasefire deadline. Here we are. The ceasefire was agreed upon. One of the sticking points was Lebanon, and that has been agreed to. So there were talks, initial talks in US facilitated those talks, and then we were hoping that yes, things are moving in the right direction because Lebanon was the sticking point that was solved. For now, the talks were on. But here comes another issue. Iran had its own blockade at the Strait of Hormuz. Iran announced we've opened the blockade, and we also saw evidence that yes, there was traffic moving quite smoothly. But US has its own counter blockade. US didn't remove that, and now US has attacked one of the Iranian ships. That was a cargo ship which was coming back. So it's not an oil tanker, but US has attacked that. And Iran is quite frustrated on that. And Iran has also attacked a couple of vessels there, one of them belonging to India as well. And India called on their envoy there in India, Iranian envoy in India, and they asked for explanation. So Iran has given its own explanation. But anyways, coming back onto the issue, now Iran said, okay, fine, if US is not agreeing to the terms of ceasefire, so they have set their own blockade. Moving further, Pakistan is once again inviting Iran and US in Islamabad at the same hotel. We understand a New York Times reporter said that again that hotel has been cleared, Serena Hotel in Islamabad. So they're very tight security. So Pakistan is all set to host US and Iran. But are they coming? That's the big question. And who is coming? While we're broadcasting this program live, at this point, US have, I did hear President Trump saying that yes, a delegation could go there. But now we're talking not in days left for the ceasefire to end. It's now a matter of hours. So the name of the delegation hasn't been announced. And Iran has also mentioned that. They haven't confirmed that they're coming. So Iran says, for that high-level discussions to happen, things haven't changed much. Nothing has changed. So we need to have some talking points. We need to have some sort of agenda. And from the US perspective, US is also claiming that yes, we need to settle down the issue sooner than later. So both the parties want to move out of this war. They're both looking for an off-ramp, especially US. But at this point, US President Masoud Pezeshkian, he's clearly mentioned in a statement, we want an honorable end to the war. And I'm using the headline, there's a lot of trust deficit. And actually the trust deficit has increased. So the room for diplomacy is narrowing down and more chances of escalation in the war. So these are my analysis. Before I move it to Monaji, once again I'd like to tell you a couple of things over here. The sticking points will be number one. Number one is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran would certainly want to maintain the control over there, or they would want to see that US also removes its blockade. So on the northern side, they have this Strait of Hormuz where Iran controlled, but around 200 kilometers south, this is the blockade by US. So if Iran says, I would move out of this blockade, so this blockade around 200 kilometers south of Iran, that also has to move out. So that's what Iran would want, because that's their main leverage. They don't want that we open the Strait of Hormuz and US still has that blockade intact. So that's number one. Second is the uranium enrichment. I don't think so Iran would ever agree to hand over whatever uranium they have enriched to US. Will there be concessions on the sanctions? I don't know. But I think the two things on the agenda would be, even if they were able to extend the ceasefire, because it's only a matter of days, things could go horribly wrong not only for both the countries, US and Israel, but also there have been discussions with Israel and Lebanon. So US and Iran, both these countries, US and Iran, would want this deadline to extend, and then Israel and Lebanon would also follow them. And I think as long as the deadline can be extended and some sort of temporary solution that buys them time at the Strait of Hormuz, if these two things are settled, at least then other things can be discussed. But I'll still say there's a lot of trust deficit now. It was always there, but I think there is more and more of trust deficit. Ramunaji, your comments on the current situation?
Yeah, you've explained the situation very well. Now, will they extend their ceasefire? I mean, we're in that 48-hour less time window, right? Because it was till this Wednesday, April 22nd. So that's to be seen. I think in the president's time in office, first term, second term, I don't think he's dealt with a situation like this before, because he's usually the one who is able to put the force and, essentially get other countries to back down, because United States, in terms of its being a superpower, its military capability, its, greatest GDP, we haven't seen this take place by any other nation to just kind of mirror him. I would say their strategies are very similar, right? It's to add pressure until their terms are met. So, for example, Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz in terms of retaliation to the war starting on February 28th by the Americans as well as the Israelis. And then from there, still holding the Strait of Hormuz as a leverage point because Israel didn't stop its occupation in southern Lebanon. And then to that, you had President Trump mirror that and say, well, we're going to block your ports and make sure you don't make money, right, to Iran, saying we're going to do to you what you're doing to the other countries, which is probably a response the GCC countries would have rathered happen a long time ago, because Iran having the chokehold of the Strait of Hormuz really affected Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Iraq, all of their output, right? So you have that in place. So President Trump mirrored that with the Iranians. And then, preventing any ships to go to the port and then attacking it, that was an escalation point. So here you have like this massive escalation point that it seems like one side will start and things just don't stay calm. Now, the question is Pakistan able to mediate this and get them to the table? Because for President Trump to say that the U.S. delegation's on its way, that means they're going to land today, latest tomorrow, but it would be today, tonight. So is this going to be a case where the vice president of the United States is going to land in Islamabad? Islamabad has 20,000 security personnel, and then Iran doesn't show. And Iran said, I'm not going to show. And can Pakistan get them to the table to show up? Because that would mean, because that would escalate things even further, right? Because it'll be very embarrassing for the president, right? If Iran doesn't show, and especially Vice President J.D. Vance. And I don't know why Marco Rubio's not there, because he is the Secretary of State. He's served, as a politician for such a long time. He is like the person that you would think would be able to be there to do these negotiations. And we know that Vice President J.D. Vance had to make, 20 calls to what Israeli Prime Minister said, report back to him. And of course, his boss, the President of the United States. So we know that he didn't go with the ability to negotiate. And we've heard reports that when Iran showed up the first time, they didn't have to call back Tehran to negotiate, the deal. So it's very interesting how, Secretary of State, which usually is in charge of this file, is sitting back in the United States. And we know the first round of talks, he was at a UFC fight with the president. And then this time around, he's not being sent there. This looks really bad for J.D. Vance because, the rumors were that both of them want to run for the Republican nomination to run for president. It's really J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance is not looking good so far with not getting any of this stuff sorted out. But it'll be very interesting if Iran does not show, because that will essentially, like, how do you extend the ceasefire if Americans are there to negotiate in Islamabad and Iran's not there? And then Iran has already said it's going to retaliate for what the U.S. did to its vessel, to the Iranian vessel. So this is a big deal. And then calling, Iran, and then Iran is saying that it's piracy, right, from seizing the Iranian vessel. And then President Trump, I read his post on Truth Social saying that it's going to be bridge and power plant day, meaning he's going to bomb it again. He's now saying Iran retaliated for saying we're going to retaliate for the seized vessel by the American forces. And now President Trump is retaliating by bringing up the whole bombing civilian infrastructure in Iran. I read his Truth Social post. So this is escalatory language for both sides, right? Not de-escalation, not negotiations, not, coming to terms on some of those key points. So this could erupt any moment. And that would mean Israel and the United States will go back into war with Iran, and then Iran will retaliate with the GCC countries. What we saw, I don't think we're going to see anything different. And then who knows if Iran will then start retaliating through its proxies, right? And then it'll start, who knows if they'll retaliate with the American vessels there. Is it going to retaliate because they're blockading the Iranian ports and now they're in Iranian territory? So it makes it, if the war erupts, it'll be fair game. So this is a very dangerous situation that nobody wants to see escalate. But the way both sides are talking, I don't know how it's going to come back down unless another country is able to mediate aside from Pakistan. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think as much as there were President Trump on one side, he threatened recently. On one side, he threatened recently that if he's been a nice guy and he's offered Iran the best deal, but in case Iran does not accept this deal, they will strike on every single power plant, every single energy infrastructure, every single bridge. That's what he says, no more the nice guy. That's what President Trump is threatening on one side. On the other side, we're listening from him that he's still saying, yes, the deal will be signed today. He's going to send a delegation there. So at least I haven't seen any delegation going, because I know when last time when J.D. Vance flew to Islamabad, there were lots of videos circulating, official videos. So now, actually, I've heard the delegation could go, deal could be signed, but there are, messages which threaten Iran on one side. I haven't seen any delegation going there, and Iran clearly stating this. There's a lot of historical mistrust as well. So that's what the president of Iran is saying. And they clearly do not want to budge. They're saying in case this war would end, it will be, Iran wants an honorable end to the war. So I think at this point, I doubt there are immediate talks happening in Islamabad. But then I also know the deadline is hours away. The ceasefire deadline is hours away. And both the countries would definitely want some sort of deal, if not much, at least the ceasefire deadline to be extended. As we're broadcasting this program, the deadline for ceasefire hasn't extended. The next, I would say, 48 hours are very crucial. So stay tuned with Ymedia. We will keep you giving all the updates, Ramona ji and myself, on very regular basis. If at all there is any deal, anything that's happening right here on all platforms of Ymedia, we'll keep you posted very regularly in case we see any talks happening, anything comes out of those talks. Trump is even saying the deal could be signed or no deal, or Iran refuses to come, whatever is happening. Stay tuned with all platforms of Ymedia. We'll keep you posted on all the details over here. Ramona ji, I also want to ask you the other factors which are in play. I'm sure one of the major factors is China. As much as India is the only one country which has good relationship with all the countries. India has good relationship with US. Many senior leaders from India recently visited US, including the Indian Air Force chief. He was there in US as well. And President Trump spoke with Prime Minister Modi, almost a 40-minute call recently, and then India has good relationship with Israel. I think India was one of the few countries who knew that this attack is going to happen. I know you asked this question on our very first episode after this war began. I have no confirmation of that, but at least Israel confirmed they would wait for Prime Minister Modi to go back. So maybe in their discussions they told him, as much as European nations are claiming that they were never told, they were not involved. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney has clearly said this: we were not told, we were not informed, we were not asked. So we had no clue that this war would begin. So India has good relationship with Canada, US, England, very good relationship, trade relationship with us, great relationship with the European Union. India has good relationship with Iran as well, and India has good relationship with Israel. But I doubt, this is what I have stated from the start, I doubt India has that sort of leverage. China certainly has that sort of leverage. China, and here China has been supporting Iran on one side, providing them the logistic support, whether it was the satellite imagery or whatever they provided to Iran for all attacking its targets, and buying oil from Iran. But China is also holding talks with US. President Trump is scheduled to travel to China on 14th and 15th of May. As much as US is sometimes threatening, that's President Trump's style, China do not supply any weapons. Anybody who's doing trade with Iran, there'll be 50% additional tariffs. So many things President Trump has been saying. But I doubt China would stop here. But China still has the leverage. So what role can China play over here? President Trump is coming to China. Maybe China can talk to Iran that yes, go ahead to Islamabad, because China and Pakistan, they're all-weather friends. For many, many decades I've seen this, whatever might happen, but China and Pakistan are also all-weather friends. So China could talk to Iran that yes, go ahead, and President Trump is scheduled to visit. Because China, as much as it could have few gains, but China also stands to lose. Please, go ahead.
You know, this is showing how there isn't a proper organization on both sides in both countries when it comes to Iran and the United States. Iran, we can determine because the Ayatollah was killed and top official leaders in the Iranian regime were killed on the attacks on February 28th. And it created a decentralized way of doing things where all the provinces then activated to go into war. Yes, a new Ayatollah was chosen, right? Khamenei's son, but we haven't seen him. He's put out 2 statements through, Iranian state TV, but written statements, not in video form. No one's seen him, and there's some sort of conversation around the fact that he's been hurt in those attacks, where his father, his mother, his wife, all of them were assassinated. So we know why there's a decentralized system in Iran. And therefore, when there were ceasefire talks, on April 7th, we still heard that there were some attacks on the GCC countries, right? Where the naval base, where the U.S. Army bases were. So we know that. But what's interesting is U.S. is the same way, because when the ceasefire was announced between Israel and Lebanon last week, Thursday, for 10 days, Iran said Strait of Hormuz is open. And yet the president could have then removed the blockade, because the blockade was already there, right? Before the ceasefire with Israel and southern Lebanon. Not even southern Lebanon, because they also hit Beirut. So when the ceasefire took place, the blockade was already there by the American vessels. So when that was agreed on and Iran said, we're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz, if there was clear communication from, their defense or war secretary, Pete Hegseth, to the American soldiers, the American vessels stationed there, they could have de-escalated and stopped the blockade, right? Because there's no reason to create a blockade on the Iranian ports when everybody was on ceasefire and also the Strait of Hormuz was open. Because we know that from tracking, ships were going through. So it wasn't just, false sort of announcement. So it's showing how they're not controlling the channels, because you can't blame the US vessels there. They're there on a command by the White House, by by Pete Hegseth. So they're doing their job. And when they, seized the Iranian vessel, they were doing their job as they were given a command. But that's why it goes up to the chain of command to the Secretary of War, Mr. Hegseth, who should have implemented, back off now because we're in ceasefire. They've opened up the Hormuz. Israel and Lebanon have agreed. Israel, Iran, and US have agreed. We're due for talks. Deadline is on the 24th. Then everybody can show, because that's how you build trust, right? You build trust by keeping your word. And when you don't keep your word, then obviously there's a trust deficit. So we can't, obviously this is the situation as it is, right? We're here because of the mismanagement by the administration. That's essentially it. Because if I was doing, God forbid, Pete Hegseth's job, then I would withhold my vessels and say, okay, let's clear the blockade and we'll just stay nearby to make sure the Strait of Hormuz stays open, because the Iranians said it was open. We're just there to monitor it's open, but we're not there to blockade anything, right? And we're there to make sure that, because Americans have always been for the petrodollar to make sure everybody plays nice and they monitor the maritime. So I would keep the vessels there, remove them from the blockade on the Iranian ports, and then as a watchful eye to make sure the Strait of Hormuz is open and to create somewhat of a security measure for all the vessels going in and out. Insurance premiums are through the roof. We know there's backlogs of oil. This also helps me keep my relationships with my GCC partners for their production and output. But he didn't do that, right? And therefore, everything got escalated this weekend. And so President Trump can't just be like, oh, I'm sending J.D. Vance. He's on his way, right? And so meet him, right? You can't just do that. And then, so it's just very poor management on such a sensitive situation where so many people can lose their lives in so many countries. And then there's like the global economic setback on top of everything else.
Yeah, and President Trump's, latest claims on his Truth Social have been that yes, they are winning the war. He's also attacking the deal that was done in 2015. We all know US, England, Germany, France, Russia, Iran, they're all part of the deal that was done in 2015. So President Trump is criticizing that deal as well. And he's saying Iran is losing a lot of money now. So he's saying we're close to the deal. But what exactly is US looking for? At least I didn't get a clear indication from all the statements that I've heard until now. Right from the start of this war on 28 February, that has been my concern throughout this war, that I haven't heard a very clear and a concise plan. That what does US want? Even right now, if the latest statement, President Trump is saying we're close to a deal, but what sort of deal are we expecting? What is exactly the expectation? So that's why I would assume he's just looking for an off-ramp, and maybe he gets a good deal, then he'll definitely claim, President Trump will claim that, yeah, we got a good deal. Maybe not. It's even Stevens. Both countries say, okay, fine. Still both the countries, both the sides will try to claim it as a victory. So that is where we are. And I know you mentioned this thing earlier as well. Today in the show also you said there's no structure. Yeah, United Nations, with due respect, I don't think so they have any role to play in this. All the major European countries have said we were not asked, we were not involved. And China, Russia, and India, all three of them, this is a bigger question. China, India, and Russia. There's a famous old saying, when the enemy is, trying to jump in a well or doing its own, wrong, why stop that enemy? It's a famous old saying. So I don't know, India, China, and Russia, of course, they stand to lose as well. But for now, it's just a wait and watch situation for them. As far as their economies are concerned, the latest numbers from IMF has clearly indicated India still holds the tag for the fastest growing economy. IMF numbers are clearly indicating that. China is doing reasonably well, 6.5% for India, 4.4% for China, US around 2.5%, Canada 1.5, 1.2%, 26, 27, I'm talking over here. So I think every country is saying we're doing fine. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney, we're the second fastest economy in G7. US is saying we're the fastest economy in G7, growing pretty well. China says, oh, we have great export going on, our economy 4.5%, or they're saying we could even do better in 26, 27. India says, oh, our economic numbers have been upgraded by IMF despite tariffs and war-like situation. So, and Russia's economy, not that well, but still doing fine. And Russia gets to sell its oil at a premium. So here we are. I don't know who's really going to bring the two sides together. Ramunaji, your final comments. And once again, we like to remind you, we will keep tabs on everything, whatever latest is happening, because there are certain reports in US media as well, which are saying, yes, a delegation could be on the way to Pakistan, but Iran hasn't said yes. I have checked every single source that I could. So I don't know what's happening here. Please, Ramunaji, your final comments.
Yeah, and I want to answer. You asked me a question about China. So China's push is on electric vehicles, right? We're talking about China is innovating when it comes to, all the green energy, everything else. What has happened because this war has also reminded the entire, global population how much we rely on oil and how unstable that can be because of these conflicts, because of the region it comes out of, right? So we got Venezuela for, biggest, reserves. Then, Canada's number 4, right? After Saudi and Russia. So Canada's right there. So what is Canada's strategy? We know that because Venezuela, what happened with Maduro, that's a whole separate issue with the United States. So this is another thing to take a look at, right? I mean, what is our plan? For the last 10, 15 years, they've talked about green energy, electric vehicles and whatnot, and a way to introduce it into society. But we still highly, highly rely on oil. So that's one point. So in a way, China is, watching. It's one of its biggest competitors, the tariffs that the United States have put on it and everything else in between. Essentially, it's watching that United States has had to go through billions of dollars a day to fund this war. It's having low approval ratings for this president, who now needs to do a deal because of his meeting in China just next month. So, it puts also China in a leverage point because they were part of the ceasefire talks through Pakistan. They had a big involvement. So there's that whole entire aspect that now the United States kind of needs China in a way. But also for China, they're looking at this as a possible way of okay, while this continues and Israel is seeking its mission to, occupy southern Lebanon to the Litani River, well, we want Taiwan. So what does that mean for Taiwan? That's a whole nother aspect. And then, of course, then you have South Korea, North Korea. What does it mean for Japan? And also seeing that if Iran can take the Strait of Hormuz, if the United States agrees to this point that Iran wants to formalize its control of the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe they do a deal with the president. Remember, the president said, "Hey, we want to take part of those tolls," right? Essentially, Iran is offering. The latest numbers were like $2 million as a security fee for a passage to the Strait of Hormuz, right? That will protect your vessels to go through. That's another sticking point, right? So if the Iranian vessel has been hit, now Iran, before giving a fee of $2 million to keep the vessel secure, we're talking about foreign vessels secure through the Strait of Hormuz, that kind of makes their situation not so great, because how can they provide security for $2 million for a vessel to go through the Strait of Hormuz? Because Iran was essentially exploiting the crisis, right, by doing that. And now because they were seized by the American ships, essentially showing that Iran doesn't have that leverage, which is what the president did which is now why Iran doesn't want to show up for the peace talks. So, because President Trump, I don't think ever imagined that he's going to send a delegation and then, the other party's not going to show up. And I think Iran won't show up because this is just how this is how it operates. Like you can't bully Iran into a situation which the president is used to bullying so many nations. When you bring up India, where does that leave India's relationship with Israel, right? The two leaders, Netanyahu and Modi, great friends, but because of this war, India has suffered because India gets 65% of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz, and they get their fertilizers from that place for domestic crop usage. So, so is there ever a phone call to be like, hey, this war that's taking on and you're occupying southern Lebanon, it's affecting us? I don't know. So there's that aspect. And so every way you slice and dice this, yeah, Russia's doing well because it gets to sell its oil with the embargo. Iran was already selling, if you recall, because there was like 2,000 ships that were stranded because of the blockades. And so then even the president was saying Iran can sell its, oil, the vessels that are stranded, because he saw that, oil went over $100 per barrel. So every way you look at this, it's like one tries to create a leverage with a threat or an action, and the other side responds equally with the threat and the action. There isn't one that's de-escalating or, meeting halfway or any of that stuff. When it comes to the regime, what do they have to lose, right? They want to assume power and they don't want to lose their grip on Iran. So they're going to go to the end. And this president needs to save face because he's lost a lot of supporters in a very short period of time. So there's all of that. And then what's structurally awkward is you're not sending, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, for these meetings. You're sending Jared Kushner, that doesn't have a position in this administration. He doesn't, because if you have a position, you have to go through Senate hearings. You have to go through security clearance. You have to go through, if there's any conflict of interest, which is what the Senate hearings are. We know Jared Kushner already has financial conflicts of interest because he has taken $2 billion from Saudi Arabia, from their sovereign wealth fund, to invest, and he invested in Israel. So we know that he has financial implications right there, and it's so. He's heading the meetings with Steve Witkoff before this war started, and he's the one who gave the president, his father-in-law, advice to go into war when they were near negotiations. So structurally, it just is weird, and this is a country that has laws, rules of law, regulation, has structure. Why do we have a Secretary of State sworn in by the Senate and everything else if he's not there for these negotiations? What's the point of his job? Like, really, why is he there if he's not there for one of the biggest conflicts for this administration? Why is somebody who is a private citizen, such as Jared Kushner, there for such high sensitive matter and making decisions? Why is he there? Like, it makes no sense in terms of how this administration is operating on any of this stuff. So in a way, can you be surprised why we're where we are given the entire scenario?
Yeah, some very good points that you've made. But once again, I'm going to show you a video from Islamabad where all the security preparations are being made, and things are being lined up for US-Iran discussions. So things are tidying up there. There are a lot of police checkposts over there. But for now, nothing has been confirmed other than this. You see that Serena Hotel in the background. That's the hotel where the talks took place. You look at that, the gas stations, they're all wired. And when you look at this video, you'll clearly see this, that Islamabad is once again getting ready for discussions between US and Iran. But will there be any discussions? That's the big question. We will keep you posted. Stay tuned with Ymedia and all its platform. If you're in US, you can watch Channel Y on Sling in US on Dish Network. If you're in Canada, Rogers, Bell, Telus, Ignite. And if you want to listen it on Radio Y, FM 105.9. At the bottom of your screen, you have the phone number. You can text and ask us about our broadcast messages. Thank you so much, Ramona ji. That's all the time that we have today. And it's always good to talk to you. You take care. We'll carry on the discussion. Any moment the news arrives, we will be back live on Ymedia platforms. Thank you so much for now. Thank you.
Thank you.